Michael Clark had not been spotted in Clove Hill for 14 months, ever since the harsh winter storm that tore through the canyons and ripped shingles from every rooftop in the settlement. Some claimed he had perished in the snow. Others murmured about a collapse somewhere up north, and a few whispered that blood stained his hands along with a corpse buried beneath his porch. Whatever the reality, when he finally returned in early summer, steering a weathered mule cart along the ridge road with a rifle slung across his back and something heavy wrapped in canvas beneath sacks of salt and dried meat, nobody dared to ask where he had been. He arrived as silently as twilight, boots dragging dust behind him, his beard longer than ever before, and his eyes hollowed into something barely human. The owner of the general store, Jack Benson, attempted a smile when Clark stepped inside that morning. It was strained, like the smile of a man facing a bear uncertain if it was hungry. "Back for nails or rope?" Benson asked, instinctively reaching below the counter where he kept an old Smith & Wesson. Clark did not meet his gaze and simply placed 4 silver coins on the worn wood, then gestured toward the iron tools hanging on the back wall. Benson retrieved them without a word, his palms slick with sweat. Outside, Clark loaded the tools into his cart next to a broken saddle and a pile of firewood he had personally chopped down by the creek. The sun beat fiercely upon the dry dirt road, and horses snorted somewhere in the distance. Yet Clark moved like a figure of stone and shadow, detached from the bustling world around him. People observed him from windows and behind drawn curtains, their glances shifting toward the tarp-covered form in the back of the wagon, something lengthy and uneven, tied with rope. It might have been a deer, perhaps, or a bundle of wooden posts. Yet the manner in which he moved around it, delicate, protective, never taking his eyes off it, made them uneasy. In the tavern, the piano fell silent as he entered through the door. A card game paused with players holding their hands mid-play. The bartender, old Frank Carter, who once served Michael Clark whiskey on the night his daughter disappeared, cleared his throat but remained silent. Michael looked older, not only in the creases on his face, but in the way his shoulders slumped and in the stillness enveloping him like thick oil. He did not order a drink, nor did he sit down. He just stood briefly, scanning the crowd's faces, then turned away and left without a single word. They let him go. No one trailed him. No one wished to. As dusk approached, he arrived back at the town's edge, the mule plodding slowly, dragging hooves through gravel and sagebrush. He ignored the church, avoided glancing toward the cemetery, and did not acknowledge the boy waving from the blacksmith's yard. His gaze remained fixed straight ahead on the trail curving toward the southern ravine, the route to his ranch, the land only he managed, a place the townsfolk spoke of only in hushed tones. Behind him, the sky glowed orange as he passed the old execution tree, where 3 rusty horseshoes still swung in the breeze like iron chimes. When Michael Clark arrived at the junction near Miller's Hill, the mule came to a halt without prompting. Michael dismounted, stretched his back, and walked around the wagon. He pulled back the canvas just slightly, revealing aged wood, rusted hinges, and a hint of something carved delicately with floral patterns. It was a coffin. No name tag, no inscription. He stared at it for a long moment before covering it again. No one had ever inquired about it. No one had ever dared to. That night, beneath the vast quiet of the stars, he reached his ranch gate. The hinges screeched as he pushed it open. Weeds tangled high, the fence partially fallen apart. He secured the mule, unloaded his tools, and left the wagon where it rested. Michael lifted the coffin alone, slowly, carefully. Inside the house, nothing had changed. Dust coated the mantelpiece. A single teacup sat on the table. An apron hung where his wife once kept it. He placed the coffin in the center of the main room, lit a lamp, removed the canvas. Inside lay not a body, but many objects. A locket, a doll missing one eye, a Bible with charred edges, and a small blue dress stained with something brown and dry. He gently closed the lid, then sank into the nearest chair, remaining motionless until dawn. No tears, no prayers, only silence. Outside, the wind shook the shutters, but Michael stayed frozen, haunted not by spirits, but by memories, by something heavier than remorse and colder than sorrow. The following day, he did not visit the town. He dug quietly behind the shed, a deep, square hole. He bordered the grave with stones, quietly laid the coffin into the soil without any ritual. No memorial, no words, only earth, sweat, and the heavy cloak of silence wrapping around what once was. That night, as the sun sank bleeding behind the hills and bats awoke beneath the barn's rafters, he returned to the porch, holding his pipe unlit. A storm brewed on the distant edge of the prairie, the wind shifting, carrying the smell of rain mixed with dust. Then he heard it. The clatter of harness, the sharp command of a merchant's mule, faint laughter of strangers who did not belong in that quiet place. He turned to look. A wagon was coming, swaying unevenly. 4 men sat atop, none from Clovehill, garbed in rugged uniforms without any markings. At the rear of the wagon, bound by wrists and ankles, lay a figure. A woman, barely dressed, her body streaked with blood and grime, hair stuck to her face in matted tangles. The wagon halted close to his gate. One man jumped down, spat at the ground, and called out to no one in particular. "Fresh haul. Traded her from Jasper's Pit for 2 barrels of kerosene and a busted compass. Tough one, but no talking. No crying either. Might be cracked upstairs. Anyone interested? Make an offer before she bleeds out." Michael Clark did not move, did not blink. He watched as they pushed the girl upright, chains clinking, her knees folding in the parched grass. She slowly raised her head, and in the fading light of dusk, their eyes locked. His face remained unchanged. Yet beneath the calm, something shifted, like the sudden break of a thread stretched beyond its limit. Michael Clark rose and descended from the porch, strolling deliberately toward the wagon. The men tensed slightly, one resting a hand on his belt knife. "We are not seeking trouble, sir. Just trying to unload a burden." Michael remained silent. He paused beside the cart, glancing once more at the girl, at the bruises, cuts, and burns covering her. Then his gaze fell on the chain threaded through the wooden floorboards. Without waiting for a word, he pulled a knife from his belt and cut through the binding. The girl wobbled but stayed upright. One man moved forward. "Hold on now," Jack Benson started. Michael simply turned. The man froze. Michael threw a pouch of coins into the dirt and then lifted the girl, chains and all, carrying her back toward the house. She neither resisted nor spoke, yet her eyes never left his. In that gaze, as the wind stirred dust across the land and distant thunder rumbled beyond the hills, something ancient passed between them. Not recognition or thanks, but something deeper, something like understanding or warning, or perhaps both. The chains dug painfully into her flesh with every jolt of the cart, the iron straps far too tight, the rusted links tearing through scabbed wounds that had not yet healed. She stayed silent. She did not plead, not when the wagon struck a bump and she slammed against the wooden side. Not when one of the guards chuckled and threw stale bread her way, deliberately making sure it fell just beyond her grasp. Not even when they halted atop a ridge overlooking a house that seemed to have forgotten joy long ago, and the man who stepped onto the porch appeared more like a figure carved from ash rather than a living human. Fear had left Lydia long before that moment. She felt it slip away on the second night underground when the last candle's flame died out, and she discovered what darkness meant when it held sharp teeth. After that came the cold, then the hunger, then silence. Then the faint whispers of the others' names, repeated in her mind before they disappeared. And now she was here, still breathing, barely, yet not broken, not in the way they intended. The man approached them slowly, dust swirling around his boots, his rifle hanging by his side but untouched, his gaze unreadable. One of the traders straightened up, moving his hand near the grip of a pistol, yet the man remained unfazed. He regarded them as if they were insignificant, as if he had witnessed far worse, had become far worse, and whatever they held did not compare to the burden reflected in his eyes. He did not inquire about her identity. He did not question why she was chained. He did not ask what had been done to her, or what she might have done in return. He looked at her, ignoring the bruises or the dried blood staining her dress, the metal cuff welded to her wrist, or the burns marking her shoulder like fractured scripture. His gaze met hers, and something inside her tensed, expecting the familiar spark. Disgust, pity, curiosity, desire. But instead, there was nothing. Only stillness. A stillness that could mean either madness or a mercy too exhausted to bear a name. The man faced the merchant, who was chewing on a reed, and spoke in a voice rough like cracking dry bark. "How much for the chain?" The merchant blinked, spat to the side, and replied, "It's not about the metal, friend. She's tied to a debt. There's no bill of sale, but she came from Jasper's lot. You know, Jasper, mean as snakes and twice as tough to kill. He's got a dozen like her down south, but this one causes trouble. She killed a handler with a damn belt buckle. We were told to get rid of her quietly. Thought we'd stop and see if anyone wanted a discount on madness." The man did not flinch. "How much for the chain?" The merchant chuckled nervously this time. "You don't want this trouble. We'll be blamed either way if she ends up skinned and buried on your property. Want to hang for someone else's crimes?" Michael Clark reached inside his coat, not for a weapon, for a pouch of coins wrapped in oilskin. He dropped it onto the ground between them. Silver coins clinked against the stones. The others watched, tense and uncertain. The merchant bent down, opened the pouch, his eyes growing wide enough to see what was inside. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "Are you serious?" Clark remained still. The merchant shrugged and gestured to one of his men, who bent down with a file and began sawing through the chain. Lydia remained motionless. Not when the metal gave way. Not when her body shifted forward and she had to steady herself on knees stained with blood. Not even when Michael Clark stepped closer and lifted her up, her weight as light as damp fabric and just as cold. She anticipated the usual: harsh grip, searching hands, a murmur of warnings. Instead, he held her like something fragile but not valuable, as if she were already damaged, and he simply wanted to prevent her from breaking apart before reaching inside. The traders mounted their horses, laughing uneasily now, eager to depart. One shouted without turning back, "Good luck, stranger," and added, "If she does not tear you apart the first night, You might be crazier than she is." Inside the house, the air was heavy with dust and the scent of citrus oil. The walls did not make a sound as they entered. The quiet was almost tangible. He carried her down a brief hallway, past a room with closed shutters, into a side chamber with no bed, only a cot, a basin, and a small stove set against the wall. Gently, he placed her down, stepped back, and closed the door behind him. She heard the bolt slide into place, not locking her inside, but shutting the outside world away. A minute passed, then another. The door opened once more, and he returned carrying a bucket of warm water, a cloth, and a folded gray garment. He spoke not a word, simply setting the items beside the cot before leaving again. No queries, no assistance, no threats. She tore the ruined dress away from her skin in fragments. The injuries were far worse than she had recalled. Sharp red gashes, some infected, others clean, all painfully sensitive. She carefully wiped them with the cloth, flinching but not making a sound. She removed the dried blood from her arms, her neck, and the inner parts of her thighs. Then, with great caution, she picked up the garment he had left behind. It was a simple dress made of soft flannel, worn but clean. Sewn with attention, the hem was let out to fit someone taller than her. Inside the collar, faint but still clear, was a name. Rose. It was not her name. It never had been, but it belonged to someone who had meaning, someone he had loved or laid to rest or possibly both. Lydia put it on. When Michael Clark returned hours later, carrying a bowl of broth and cornbread wrapped in a linen cloth, she was sitting quietly on the cot, her hair still damp from washing, eyes fixed on the blank wall. She remained silent. He did not expect her otherwise. He set the meal down and started to leave, then hesitated. "It belonged to my wife," he said without looking at her. "You do not have to wear it." She offered no answer and needed none. This time he closed the door behind him more slowly. That night, falling asleep proved difficult. She lay under the covers, attentive to the sounds filling the house, the creaking of aged wood, the wind sweeping dry branches against the roof, and far-off howls of coyotes reverberating through the canyon. Yet there were no footsteps approaching, no keys twisting in locks, no heavy breathing lingering near the entrance. Only stillness remained, along with the faint smell of a dying fire in the hearth, a clean blaze, free from smoke or decay. Somewhere within the darkness, Lydia finally allowed her fingers to loosen. Her hands had been tightly clenched for so long that she had not noticed the soreness. She did not understand what the man wanted from her. Perhaps nothing. Perhaps everything. But at that moment, for the first time in months, she sensed she was no longer prey. Instead, she was a mystery that no one had dared to solve yet. Deep inside her, in the places untouched even by the worst men, something small and keen awakened. Something older than mere survival. Not hope, not yet, but a faint remembrance of it. It did not start with speech or touch, but with the creak of a door purposely left unlocked. Michael Clark was never one to indulge in rituals. Yet he had been taught to seal doors against the darkness, to secure latches and close shutters, especially in a place like this where the wind could carry voices that belonged to no living soul. However, the night after he discovered her lying in the crib dressed in his late wife's gown, he left her door unfastened. He said nothing. He did not glance back as he removed her empty bowl from the room, nor when her eyes followed him with a stillness that no longer resembled fear, but something far more perilous, an alertness without reproach. She did not express gratitude, nor had he anticipated it. But that night, an unspoken connection formed between them. A pause, a change. The silence of the home starting to breathe anew. She did not drift off to sleep immediately. She perched on the cot, arms wrapped around her knees, bare feet touching the polished wooden floor. The dress she wore no longer held the scent of decay and smoke, but smelled of soap and cedar. Her hair had dried, falling in waves along her collarbone, and when the breeze swept through the small window above the cot, she lifted her face toward it, not seeking solace, seeking a reminder that the world outside still moved, that she was no longer beneath it. Michael Clark sat downstairs at the kitchen table, his back turned to the fire while a tin cup of tea cooled in his hand. He did not drink it. He had stopped drinking since the day they discovered the blood behind the chicken coop and nothing else. Rose had disappeared between breaths, and by the time anyone realized to search for her, it was already too late. The land had claimed her, as it always did the vulnerable and the slow, yet she had been neither. This meant someone had taken her, or something far worse. After that, he spoke less often, worked with greater intensity, and buried more secrets beneath the earth than he would ever confess. Now there was this girl, Lydia. He had never asked her name, but it revealed itself in his mind, etched onto the piece of metal resting beneath her collarbone, embedded deeply in a burn mark as if someone needed to remember and chose cruelty as a reminder. That evening, she acted in a way he hadn't anticipated. She descended the stairs barefoot, moving carefully like someone who had only ever known hallways where silence meant protection and sudden noises signaled danger. He heard her long before he noticed her. The faint creak of the step he never repaired. Her breath held tightly as the wind shifted. She stopped in the kitchen doorway and did not step inside. Instead, she just stood there, quietly observing the flickering flames in the fireplace and watching him carefully avoid meeting her gaze. He did not turn around, but spoke without looking back. "Are you feeling hungry again?" She shook her head in response. He sensed it more than actually saw it. The air itself shifted slightly with the motion. He reached into the cupboard and took out a folded piece of cloth, placing it carefully on the table. Inside lay a small carving knife. Not a kitchen blade, but a more delicate, older tool designed for shaping wood. He slid it toward the edge closest to her. "My wife used to carve spoons," he said, when sleep eluded her. She said that carving kept her hands from recalling other memories. Lydia moved forward gradually, her toes curling against the chilly floor. She did not touch the knife. Not yet. But she sat down. That was sufficient. What followed was more gradual, unfamiliar. She remained silent. He never urged her to speak. Days slipped by with tasks completed side by side. She repaired whatever she could. Ripped sacks, damaged hinges, splintered boards. He allowed it, never complaining when she handled tools he had not used in many years or arranged nails neatly by size across the table. She did not leave the grounds, not once, not even to the ridge. From the porch, he observed her hauling a broken chair under the sunlight, seating herself against the barn's wall with a piece of leather in one hand and a small knife in the other. She incised lines into it. Not decorations, not signs. Just lines, perhaps one for every day or each night without dreams. The steady pace of her work blended into the house's rhythm, like the ticking of the old clock or the creaking of the floorboards when the temperature fell. Then, after a fortnight of shared space without any words, the first genuine interaction took place. It was evening. Michael Clark had just finished inspecting the northern fence, a coil of barbed wire resting over his shoulder. The sun had quickly set, bringing with it a sharp chill that marked the beginning of early autumn. He entered through the back door, his boots coated in red dust, and almost missed it. The sound of movement coming from upstairs. It was not the sound of someone pacing, but rather searching. He followed it cautiously, uncertain, and discovered that the door to the shuttered room was slightly ajar. That room had remained untouched since Rose vanished. No one had entered it, not even to clear the dust. Yet now Lydia was inside, standing barefoot in the center, her hand hovering just inches above the dresser where Rose's music box rested closed, covered in dust and a solitary spider web. She did not look at him when he stepped into the frame. She remained still. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from holding back. Then she did something he could not interpret. Slowly, she turned and passed by him without a glance or pause, and as she brushed past, the back of her hand barely touched his coat sleeve, a faint whisper of contact, a momentary warmth, so slight it should have meant nothing, yet Michael felt it like an explosion. She had touched him on purpose. No accident, no hesitation, just enough to say, "I acknowledge you." The following morning, the music box sat on the kitchen table. She must have brought it down during the night. He gazed at it quietly for a while before reaching out to wipe the dust from its edge. When he lifted the lid, the melody did not play. It had been broken for many years. Yet inside lay a single curled piece of paper. A note, just 3 words, penned in tight, slanted handwriting. "Do not forget her." He flipped it over. Blank, no signature, no date, only those 3 words. He placed the box aside and remained silent when she came downstairs to eat. However, he noticed her hairstyle was different that morning, tied back with a worn blue ribbon he had never seen before. It once belonged to Rose. He was sure, because he had found it hidden beneath her pillow the week following her disappearance. He had not touched it since. Gradually, the balance began to shift. It was not loud or sudden, but subtle and steady, like roots slowly spreading beneath a doorframe. Lydia started humming while she worked. Not full songs, but fragmented, airy, delicate notes. Michael Clark found himself pausing more frequently, not out of weariness, but because he didn't want to break the fragile sound. She moved with a sense of belonging, not possessive, but a quiet certainty that came from having endured worse and no longer fearing old shadows. By the window, she kept a bowl filled with dried herbs whose names she refused to share. Occasionally, in the dead of night, he would hear her murmuring, not in English nor any language he recognized. The whispers were soft, steady, almost like an ancient prayer. He never asked about it. One evening, after fixing the warped barn door damaged in a summer storm, he returned inside to find the table prepared for 2. There were no candles or decorations, just 2 simple bowls and cups. She stood by the stove, quietly ladling stew, but did not meet his gaze. She said softly, "You built this house to forget, but it still remembers." He remained silent and took his seat, eating in quiet. When they finished, she reached out and placed a single carved spoon in his hand. It was rough and unfinished, yet genuine. The handle resembled a tree branch, and its curved tip could hold more than expected. He turned the spoon over thoughtfully. She did not smile or explain, simply rose and left the room. Later that evening, as the flames dwindled and shadows lengthened across the floor, he set the spoon next to the music box on the mantelpiece. For the first time in more than a year, he spoke her name aloud, not Lydia's name, but Rose's. "I am still here," he murmured. "I have not forgotten." Upstairs, behind him, the floorboard creaked once, then quiet settled. It was on that very night that the wind shifted. Neither of them found rest. The storm arrived suddenly, not the type that gradually builds with darkening skies and restless animals, but the kind that falls from a clear expanse like a sudden verdict. It was nearing evening, and Michael Clark was in the southern meadow inspecting the fence where the coyotes had been cautiously probing the wires, a steady group of scavengers more patient than frantic. The air had remained still all day, heavy with a calm that presaged autumn, as if the breeze were holding its breath and even the insects moved in slow motion, anticipating something. Lydia was inside the barn, quietly occupied as usual, sorting through the dried herbs gathered along the ridge over the past week. Rosemary, pine needles, and a sour herb unknown to him, but accepted without question. The sky shifted to a strange hue, not simply dark, but a color so deep it seemed unreal, a smoky purple metallic like a bruise marking the horizon's edge. Clark rose from the post he was fixing and glanced toward the hills, then back to the house. He didn't flee. He never fled. Still, he hurried more than usual, tossing the wire and hammer into the crate and vaulting onto the saddle just as the first fierce gust of wind tore across the field, sending the chickens shrieking into the coop. By the moment he arrived at the barn, Lydia was already standing outside. Without a coat or shoes, she remained exposed to the open air, her arms hanging loosely at her sides, her gaze lifted to the sky as if she could sense something far beyond them, something profound, authentic, and ancient. Her hair was tossed about by the wind, yet she showed no reaction when the initial thunderbolt split the ridge. It was distant enough not to strike, but near enough to shake the ground. Michael Clark leapt down, seized her arm, and yelled above the roar of the wind, "Come inside!" But she stayed rooted. Her eyes were wide open, her lips moved silently, and suddenly her hand extended not toward the house, but to the north, aiming at the old pine tree that leaned over the cattle shed. The very tree Jack Benson had intended to cut down last spring had spared, whether from memory, laziness, or something harder to define. He pivoted just in time to witness the sky tear apart. Lightning struck the tree, not with a simple hit, but in a burst. A fierce white flash that illuminated the entire ranch for a brief moment before the deafening sound followed with a powerful roar that made the ground tremble. The tree did not fall. It exploded, splintered wood and flames flying like bones flung in anger, the air heavy with smoke and the sharp scent of ozone. Michael Clark stumbled backward, nearly losing his balance, ears ringing, his heart racing. He glanced at the shed. It remained upright, just barely. One corner was smoldering, the wall cracked through its center. The cattle inside bellowed, terrified. Then his eyes found her. Lydia remained still. She stood like a rock in a rushing stream, her body shaking yet rooted, her gaze fixed on the smoking wreckage. Only then did she turn to face him. He did not question how she had known. He did not wonder why she had stayed silent, refrained from fleeing or shouting. Instead, he simply took her hand, not with authority, but with empathy, and together they opened the gate, leading the animals out one at a time. The wind fought against them, pushing back fiercely, while sparks flickered on the edges of their sleeves. They moved in harmony, her touch soothing the frightened creatures, his voice calm and controlled. It required a full hour to bring every animal to safety. A grueling hour filled with heat, smoke, and thunder roaring overhead, like gods trampling through a blazing sky, yet they succeeded. As the final calf found refuge in the stone shelter beside the feed room, Lydia fell to her knees in the muddy ground, gasping deeply but silently, and Michael Clark knelt beside her without words, simply observing the rise and fall of her chest. After the storm had finally passed and the flashes of lightning had drifted away into another realm, Michael Clark guided her inside and settled her beside the warmth of the fire. Her hands bore burns, the skin reddened and blistered in several spots. He fetched some ointment and water, working quietly as he wrapped her fingers with strips of linen, avoiding eye contact. Yet she looked straight at him. When he was done, she reached into the pocket of the dress, the one still belonging to his wife and still too big for her, and pulled out a small brass item. It was a key, ancient and worn, the type used for small boxes or cabinets. She placed it carefully on the table between them, her bandaged hands trembling just a little. "She showed it to me," she whispered, her voice rough and low but carrying weight like thunder. "In the dream. I saw her standing by the pine tree where the lightning struck. She told me, 'Fear not the fire. It only consumes what is already hollow inside.'" Michael stared at the key, fully aware of what it unlocked. He remembered what he had hidden at the back of the pantry beneath floorboards he had sealed himself with hands long since forgotten how to be gentle. That evening, after Lydia had slipped into a sleep so deep it seemed like the end, Michael Clark unlocked the concealed compartment behind the pantry and retrieved the box. He had not touched it for 2 whole years. Inside lay Rose's letters, those she had penned upon her arrival, when hope in this land and in him still flourished, before the earth turned bitter and something inside her grew cold. The key turned smoothly. He read each letter by the flickering firelight, every word a sharp pain, each signature a haunting presence. At the very bottom was a photograph, Rose standing before the barn, her hand resting on the side of a horse long gone, her eyes shining brightly. He gazed at the photo for a long while, until the fire dwindled to embers and the wind outside ceased to howl like a warning. By the time dawn broke, Lydia was already awake. With her hands now wrapped in clean cloth, she stood barefoot amid the fields, watching the smoke lazily spiral from the remains of the tree. Michael stepped onto the porch, the photograph clutched in his hand. She faced him, expression unreadable. He said nothing, simply extended the picture. She accepted it, glanced once, then folded it carefully and tucked it inside the bandage on her arm, not to conceal it, but to preserve it. Then she nodded, turned back towards the field, and without looking said, "It was not the storm. It was the memory of what you failed to do. The lightning only came after it had found its way home." And in that moment, he finally understood. The rumor began at the general store, as such tales often do, with flour scattered on the counter and weary women sharing meaningful glances that spoke louder than their words. Someone mentioned seeing the girl walking barefoot across Clark's field before the storm arrived, her head tilted as if she were listening to whispers carried by the wind. Another woman claimed she heard the girl speaking to the horses, not soft murmurs or gentle whistles, but actual sentences in a language nobody recognized. By the end of the week, the girl had lost any name in town and was known only by her silhouette. The Chained One, or worse, Clark's Witch. The preacher's wife refused to pass by the gate when the girl lingered outside. A boy insisted she touched his dog, and the animal howled ceaselessly for hours afterward, refusing to approach water. When the milk soured unusually quickly in 3 separate households, and the old grave on Miller's Ridge collapsed under heavy rain, revealing bones without a coffin, the whispers grew crueler. Michael recognized the signs of a community shifting. He had witnessed it years before, long ago, when a woman in Pine Creek took her own life and the men of the town buried her child alongside her, claiming the family line was cursed. He recalled the pitchforks, the fire in men's eyes when logic gave way to fanaticism. Now he sensed that same tone again, in the footsteps trailing him at the smithy, in the silence when he entered the saloon, and in voices dipping just low enough to disguise blame as casual talk. Yet Lydia showed no sign of fear. She roamed the ranch as if the storm had unlocked something within her, as if she no longer required anyone's consent to simply be. She wandered barefoot, calm and steady, her hands now hardened by scars but skilled and steady. She created objects, small, delicate charms made of twine and wood, buttons carved from bone, feathers from birds, items she carefully placed on nails or draped over doorways. Michael Clark never questioned her. He observed her attach 3 strands of black horsehair above the chicken pen while whispering softly, as the hens clucked and moved unusually quiet. He saw her kneel beside the well, lay her hands flat on the stone edge, and remain motionless there for more than an hour. At night, she sat near the fire holding a book she could not decipher, flipping pages purely by touch. She never mentioned the town or asked to return. Yet now her silence seemed less like avoidance and more like a kind of readiness. When they arrived, it was not with chaos or disorder. They appeared in boots and hats under the afternoon sun, voices stern and firm. There were 8 of them, men and 2 women, standing quietly at the boundary of Michael Clark's land, weapons hidden but their gazes piercing. They did not shout or make a scene. Instead, they waited silently until Michael descended from the barn and approached them by the gate. The oldest among them, Martin Withers, moved forward, his hands rough, face creased and hollowed by years of harboring bitterness, like water trapped in a cracked container. "We want her gone," he stated plainly, without anger or hesitation, only the cold conviction of a man certain of his own righteousness. Michael did not flinch. "Why?" he asked. Withers remained steady. "You know why. Since she arrived, calves have been stillborn. The crops have prematurely hardened into seed, and the wind never blows favorably. My son says she speaks to things that cannot be seen. My wife wakes up crying out, saying she saw her standing at the foot of the bed, just watching." Michael studied him for a long moment before replying. "Did she ever touch your son?" "No." "Did she come close to your bed?" "No." "Then perhaps it is your home that is broken." Withers stepped closer. "You think these are merely wives' tales?" "She carries death with her. She moves as if she has been inside the earth and returned changed. We have seen things. You have seen them too." Michael Clark's hand rested gently on the post. He kept his voice calm. "She cannot speak. Being mute doesn't mean she cannot hear," a man said from behind Jack Benson. "And just because she cannot hear does not mean she cannot see. She perceives things she should not, things no one has the right to witness." Michael turned his head, catching the shadow behind the curtains. Lydia stood just inside the house, her gaze steady, hands relaxed at her sides. She showed no fear, not of them, not of this moment, only exhaustion. Michael stepped forward slightly, his boots sinking into the earth as if they were anchors. "You came here because you feel fear, but you don't understand what you fear. That is why you pose a threat. Jack Benson frowned deeply. "We are here to defend the town." Michael's jaw clenched tightly. From a girl who has not uttered a word since she arrived? From a girl who knows where the bodies lie before anyone finds them, the woman beside Jack said, folding her arms. From a girl who neither weeps nor bleeds when she should. From something unnatural. Michael stood firm. "Then leave. There is no space here for your fear." "We do not want to return with flames," the woman cautioned. "We have seen what happens when men make the wrong choices." Michael Clark rested against the gate. "So have I." He waited silently. Withers held his gaze a moment more, then turned away. The others followed behind him. No gunfire, no warnings. Yet the intention was clear. Michael observed them right away, then faced the house once again, where Lydia remained exactly where he had last seen her. He climbed the porch steps, opened the door, and looked at her. "They will return," he said. She gave a small nod. He said nothing further. That evening they refrained from lighting the fire. They ate cold bread and cheese, sitting in darkness, hearing the wind whistle outside. Outside, everything was still, yet the atmosphere felt charged, as if a breath had been held too long. A couple of days later, the first body appeared. Not a person, a cow. Killed not for food, but for ritual purposes. Its ribs marked with strange symbols, its hooves scorched. The sheriff came to question Michael, but he avoided direct inquiries. He asked if Michael had noticed unfamiliar faces on the property, or if Lydia had ever mentioned the mountains. Michael remained silent. He neither lied nor volunteered information. Lydia stayed indoors for 3 days. Then, without warning, she stepped out into the yard and started planting. Not in straight lines, but in circles. Wild, flawless, and seemingly meaningless circles in the soil. She hummed softly as she worked. Soon the birds returned, scores of them. Far too many, filling the trees, fences, and rafters. Watching, singing, then, as abruptly as they had arrived, they vanished. On the 7th day, Withers came back. He arrived alone. No boots, no hat. His face was pale. His voice lacked emotion. "I was mistaken," he admitted. "My daughter's boy fell into the well. She disappeared. Your girl. Gone for a moment, perhaps. But she located him, heard a sound no one else noticed, rescued him before he lost his breath. He is breathing now. His eyes are open." Michael waited. Withers lowered his gaze. "You brought her here for a purpose. I do not understand what it is, but I will not return, not with fire, not with anything." Michael gave a single nod. Withers walked away. That evening, Michael entered the garden. Lydia was kneeling, her hands covered in dirt, her hair mixed with leaves. He sat beside her, moving slowly, joints aching. She did not look up. He said, "They will continue to whisper." She responded softly, "They always do. Are you not scared? I have witnessed worse." He looked at her then, and for the first time he reached out, not to command, nor out of duty, but to tuck a curl of hair from her cheek. Her eyes gently closed, her breathing calmed, and in that stillness the silence between them was no longer delicate. It became a frontier, a connection, a vow, not to be ordinary, not to be comprehended, but to be acknowledged. And perhaps that was all that truly counted. The initial snowfall arrived on the very night Michael Clark failed to return home. It came unusually early, unexpected, dry and sharp as crushed bone dust drifting through the air, blanketing the ridge in a thin, deceptive layer of white that quieted even the coyotes. Lydia had spent the evening waiting, her ears tuned for the latch of the gate, the creak of leather, or the familiar thud of boots on the porch. Yet as darkness deepened and no sound broke the wind's whisper through the brittle garden stalks, a tight knot formed within her. Before dusk had even fallen, she sensed something was amiss. There were subtle signs, faint but undeniable now. The chickens had stayed inside the coop all morning, ignoring her scattered feed. The milk tasted bitter, and 3 of the protective talismans she had hung beneath the eaves had fallen during the night, despite the lack of wind strong enough to explain it. She tried to silence her instincts because the deeper part of her, the one hardened by silence, blood, and fire, knew the truth before her reason could admit it. Michael Clark was not simply running late. He was taken. She moved with deliberate care, layering her clothes and slipping into the coat Michael Clark had given her when the first frost appeared a fortnight ago. The coat was too big, draping over her shoulders like a discarded skin, but it carried his scent, a mix of ash, cedar, and a subtle metallic note. She packed a satchel with the tools she no longer questioned and wrapped her fingers in cloth to fend off the chill before leaving the house through the back door. She stepped into the dim glow of the snow-covered moonlight. The path Michael had followed stretched toward the northern pass, where the terrain dropped into winding canyons and dense pine woods, an area the locals steered clear of after nightfall, even in the summer. He had ventured there alone, intending to exchange supplies with the elderly settler near Bitter Hollow, and he was supposed to be back by midday. Yet he had not returned, and she understood the reason behind it. The blood was easy to locate. Not much, only one faint smear on a crooked fence post near the junction, partially covered by frost, its color shifting toward a rusty shade rather than bright red. Then a dragged boot print appeared, followed by another, forming a trail. Without hesitation, she traced it into the woods where shadows deepened and the snow fell more slowly, almost unwilling to settle on the ground. Her breathing remained steady, calm, and composed, her eyes scanning the brush with the focus of a natural tracker. She moved swifter than expected, propelled not by fear but by a clear determination. She could visualize him, his figure bent over, hands bound behind him, head bleeding. She sensed the rope cutting into his wrists, the pressure of a boot on his side, the heat from angry breath at his neck. This was no memory. It was a vision, not hers nor his, but some shared echo of pain that lingered in the air like smoke. By the moment she arrived at the clearing, the chill had vanished completely. The breeze had died down entirely, and snowflakes drifted lazily in gentle spirals around a fire that was clearly made with intention, far too neat to be accidental. 4 men stood nearby, some familiar and others unknown. She identified 2 immediately, one from the wagon that carried her, the man who had chuckled when she struggled to lift the bread, the other, the blacksmith's cousin, the one who had peppered her with questions about her scars. The third wore a badge he had no right to, and the fourth, broad-shouldered and silent, held a rifle aimed at a man kneeling in the snow. Michael Clark was bleeding from a split lip and a wound on his temple, his hands tightly bound, his coat removed, shirt shredded, and his face bowed not from surrender but to conceal something still unbroken. They had not noticed her presence yet, not until she stepped beyond the tree line and the firelight caught the silver glint in her eyes. The man with the badge turned abruptly, surprised, then smirked. "Well, look who the devil brought back." She remained silent, continuing her steps steadily through the snow. Her arms hung loosely by her sides, palms exposed. The man with the rifle shifted his aim toward her, but the badge-wearer motioned him to stop. "No, let her approach. She is exactly what we want." Spitting into the snow, he added, "He is only the warning." Michael Clark lifted his head, just a fraction, enough to catch a glimpse of her. His eyes were cloudy from blood loss, yet still sharp and alert. What passed between them in that instant needed no words. It was neither a plea, nor a warning, nor even surprise. It was a silent oath shared without sound. She stepped into the open space and whispered so softly it barely reached the air. "Release him." The man wearing the badge scoffed. "Or what do you expect? That we will die staring at you?" He advanced one step closer. "We know what you are. We've seen it. The preacher's wife won't stay inside anymore. Withers claims to hear you within his walls. We believe Clark was your pawn, but maybe he is simply too foolish to realize your true nature." She remained still, steady in her gaze. Then, suddenly, without any sign, she dropped her bag onto the snow and opened it. They flinched all at once. She could sense their fear as if it hung in the air itself. Yet all she withdrew was a bundle made of fabric and bone. Kneeling down, she began to arrange the items carefully. Twine, feathers, ash, teeth, a child's button, and a torn page from a book. The blacksmith's cousin scoffed disdainfully. "What on earth is that?" She spoke softly. "Names." "What?" They stared at her. "The names of things you chose to forget when fear became your gods." The man with the badge stepped forward, raising his rifle. "Enough." But no shot followed. He could not pull the trigger. His finger refused to move. A crushing weight pressed down on his chest, not physical, but overwhelming. He stumbled backward. The fire flickered low. The wind returned, cutting through the clearing like a sharp blade. She stood firm. Her hair whipped wildly, and her eyes appeared pitch black, or perhaps merely reflecting the blazing fire. "You believe you understand what I am?" she said, "because your memory holds pain more vividly than truth." Her hand rose, a slight gesture. Suddenly, the rifle was ripped from the man's grasp, landing yards distant. He howled, not from injury but from something far worse. Michael Clark dropped to his knees. Lydia approached, unfastened his bindings. The rope slipped away like discarded skin. He remained silent, unable to speak. She supported him as he rose, his weight heavy, yet his step steady. The men did not move after them. They could not. Frozen not by strength, but by the reappearance of all they tried to bury. Their guilt, their demons, mirrored back in her presence. When she and Michael finally reached the trail, thick snow blanketed the ground. He leaned on her as they went forward, crimson dripping from his fingers, but his gaze was fixed solely on her. At the house, she tended to his injuries quietly. She wrapped his ribs carefully and stayed close until dawn returned. He never questioned her actions. She never revealed them. Some truths are not meant to survive beyond the flames. Spring arrived without invitation, slipping through the thawed soil like a forgotten melody half recalled in dreams. The melting snow withdrew in irregular patches, uncovering lifeless grass, damaged fence posts, and scattered remains of creatures that had succumbed to the relentless cold. Yet at the boundary of the Clark Ranch, the thaw uncovered more than just mud and decay. It revealed color. Wildflowers emerged from the ground where Lydia had planted nothing, their roots entwined with stones and ashes, nourished by blood, memory, and something far older than either. The house no longer creaked in the same way. The atmosphere inside had transformed. Michael Clark rose early each morning, not due to nightmares but because of the steady sound of footsteps above, gentle, intentional, her steps. She no longer moved as if trying to stay hidden. Her presence filled the home, not as a mere echo or shadow, but as something alive and purposeful. She sang sometimes, not often, not with words but with long, slow hums that drifted through the beams and into the fields, like a charm meant not to repel darkness, but to remind life of its rightful place. The villagers never discussed the events that took place in the clearing. They simply could not. Those who had encountered her, who had heard her voice and emerged untouched, carried the memory like a sharp edge pressed just beneath the skin. None of them returned to Clark's land with questions or with torches. They left him in peace. Occasionally, small tokens appeared at the gate, bundles of herbs, a lamb's bone wrapped in fabric, or strings of river beads. They never knocked or called out. These offerings were left not out of fear, but rather out of a hesitant respect. Lydia gathered them, not daily, but whenever the wind shifted and she felt drawn to do so. She kept them in a cedar box by the hearth, under the carved spoon she had made for him, beside the folded picture of Rose that Michael no longer hid. Something had grown between them, although neither would have dared to name it love aloud. Love seemed too fragile, too easily shattered by the harsh world they had endured. What connected them was deeper, formed through labor and quiet moments, like when she stitched his shirts without measuring, and he adjusted the barn doors so she could lock them from inside if she wished. He never stepped into her room unless she left the door open. She never questioned where he went when he slipped away before dawn, returning with dirt on his boots and eyes lined with exhaustion. It did not matter. They were not marking time or tallying deeds. They were simply present. They were choosing to remain. One afternoon, as the sunlight stretched gently across the ridge and the hens settled silently, Michael Clark stood at the edge of the porch, watching Lydia kneel in the field, planting something from her hand into the soil. He could not tell what it was, and she did not say. But when she stood up, her hands streaked with dirt, she fixed her gaze on him for a long moment before nodding toward the hillside behind the shed. That evening, she led him there. In the darkness, holding only a lantern between them, she revealed the spot she had cleared. It was a garden of sorts, but not intended for food. Around it were markers arranged in a wide circle, crafted from branches and old fence pieces, each tied with a strip of cloth, some white, others black, and some red. She knelt beside one and said, "The others, from before." Her tone was steady. He did not question who she meant. Instead, he placed his hand on her shoulder, remaining like that until the lantern flickered out. Weeks went by. She laughed once, surprising them both. It was neither light nor easy, yet cracked open in a way that felt like something long rusted finally given in. He had shared a story about a goat, something from years past, and her face turned toward the window, as if the sky itself might hold back her smile. Then the laughter slipped out. She covered her mouth, embarrassed. He did not smile. He only said softly, "This is what this house needed." On the first day of June, he discovered her sitting by the porch steps holding a bundle, a dress, not belonging to Rose, not borrowed from anyone. one she had crafted herself, a deep crimson shade, reminiscent of dried cranberries in the cliffs of canyons. She wore it as though it had grown from her very skin, her bare feet resting on the dust, her hair flowing freely. He observed her descending the steps into the sunlight, and for a fleeting moment everything else vanished. The war, the sorrow, the graves, the bloodshed, even Rose. All of it melted into the silence between heartbeats. She faced him, the fabric gently moving with the breeze, and said, "You can build a life from what was taken away if you stop pretending you must still face punishment." He moved closer, reached for her hand, and this time she did not pull away. She did not recoil. She simply held him. They remained there quietly, hidden from the world without the need to be witnessed. The sky above was vast and calm, and the wind bore no warnings, but only the fragrance of earth warmed anew. No promises were exchanged, no pledges made. Yet, on that day, something came to an end, something that had to conclude, and in its place, something fresh began, subtle, hard-won, and completely their own.